friends, and welcome to the Friday installment of a Daily Walk devotion. I hope that you're enjoying these devotions. I encourage you to maybe share them with others who are wanting to start off their day and looking for something to kind of jumpstart their devotional morning. Oh, we'd love to have you join us and also have others join us in the future. But listen, today, if you haven't been with us, we are in the book of 1 Timothy, still just plodding our way through in this first chapter, this letter that was written by a pastor to a pastor, encouraging him how to lead within the church and to love the people that he was overseeing. And so Paul's writing to Timothy, thus the letter is called 1 Timothy. But you'll notice we pick up today, chapter 1, looking at verse 5. And Paul says this, "Now the purpose of the commandment is love from a pure heart and from a good conscience and from sincere faith, from which some, having strayed, they've turned aside to idle talk." You know, when Paul is writing to Timothy, there were definitely some problems within the church. And that should come as no surprise to us because, listen, if you don't know this yet, newsflash, there is no perfect church. There just isn't. Because the church is full of imperfect people. The only places the church is perfect is in heaven because it's with Jesus and there's no sin and no flesh. But until we get to heaven, well, we're imperfect people. There's imperfect pastors. Someone once told me, "John, if you find a perfect church, don't go there. You'll ruin it." Of course, I knew what he meant. There is no perfect church. And so the problems that were taking place there in the church of Ephesus, Paul is encouraging Timothy to do something, well, that's a little bit uncomfortable. That wasn't always easy. He had to confront some of these things. He had to have conversations with people that were difficult. Maybe you've had that happen before where maybe even today you're thinking, oh, I have to have a conversation with somebody. I really don't want to have it. And yet it's important. It's necessary if you're going to go forward. And one of the problems that was happening there, Paul says, is that they had forgot the purpose of the commandment, which was love from a pure heart, a good conscience. Some people were straying away from sound doctrine and they were getting into false doctrine. But I love what Paul says, that the purpose of the commandment is love from a pure heart. You know, when Jesus was asked during his ministry, what's the greatest commandment? It's a good question. It's a fair question. Jesus said, well, this is the greatest commandment, that you love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. And then Jesus said, the second commandment is like unto it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On this hang all the law and the prophets. In other words, Jesus said you could sum up the entire Old Testament by loving God and loving people. He actually summed up the 10 commandments in that way because the first part of the commandments has to do with our relationship with God. And then the second part of the commandments has to do with our relationship with our fellow man. Love God, love people. If we could do that, it'd be a much different world. But Paul goes on to say, some had forgotten about that and about loving with a pure heart and from a good conscience. And he says it got so bad that some had actually strayed. They'd strayed and turned aside to other things like what? Idle talk. And not only that, verse 7, he says, they desire to be teachers of the law, but they understand neither what they say nor the things which they affirm. Can you imagine that? Here they are claiming to have knowledge, and yet they don't even know what they're talking about. They've come in and they don't understand that it's love from a pure conscience. They don't understand sound doctrine, and yet they want to be teachers. They feel like they have the inside scoop on this particular thing, and so they get up to teach, and it makes no sense. Why doesn't it make any sense? Because, well, he says this, they don't understand what they are saying, and they don't even understand the things that they affirm. Again, sometimes you come across people like that. They claim to have some knowledge, but they really don't know what they're talking about. They don't, it's not sound doctrine. Maybe they got a piece of this off the internet, or, hey, I saw this guy on YouTube. You should check this out. Have you heard about this? And did you know that? No, actually, I've never heard about that. And I can't find that in the Bible either. So be careful of those things. They're all out there. Social media, different things, different channels. And from time to time as a pastor through the years, people will say that to me. Pastor John, have you watched this? Here, let me send you this link. Like, I don't have time to watch all the links that I get sent. Some of them are just, quite frankly, they're strange. Like, these people don't know what they're talking about because they don't know sound doctrine and they don't even know what they're affirming. So watch out for that. He's telling Timothy, hey, be aware of these guys. But then in verse 8, he says, but we know that the law is good if one uses it lawfully. Knowing this, that the law was not made for a righteous person, but the lawless and insubordinate, for the ungodly, for sinners, for unholy, profane, murderers, fathers of murderers and mothers and manslayers, fornicators. I mean, he goes on. I mean, this description that Paul gives is rather lengthy and disturbing, the things that he describes. But he points out the fact that there is a reason for the law. It has its purpose. Now, one of the things that had come into the churches that Paul had planted that was causing confusion and creating division was a group of people who were known as the Judaizers. And they dogged Paul almost everywhere that he went. He would start a church, he would move on, they would come behind him, try to undermine the church, and then move on, move on. I mean, they were always, and what they were doing is they were basically saying, and I'm summarizing, but they would say that your relationship with God is Jesus plus this. Jesus plus keeping the law. Jesus plus going through the outward physical surgery of circumcision. You need to, in other words, you need to become a Jew to be truly saved. They would say, you know, it's great what Paul told you about the gospel. That's wonderful and all, but he left out some of the more difficult truths. He didn't tell you everything. So we're here to tell you the whole truth. He gave you, the beginning, but that you're not really saved unless you do this. And some of the people actually believed some of these things that they were being taught. They had gravitated toward trying to keep the law, trying to keep the dietary laws, even some going through a surgical procedure to somehow be made right in the Lord. And others, when they heard about what else was required besides Jesus, they said, hey, you know what? We're out. We're not doing Christianity. That's a little too painful. And they stepped away. So Paul had to write these letters. But he did say the law does have its purpose. Guys, what's the purpose of the law? The purpose of the law is to show us our need for a Savior. When I look at the law, it shows me I violated God's law. There's a reason for it. And this law, Paul would write in another place to the Galatians, this law of God shows me that I need someone to help me. I need a Savior. It points me, in other words, to a Savior. Some of these people that were teaching like they were experts in the law, they really didn't understand its purpose, what its meaning actually was. But Paul understood. And he's reiterating to Timothy, listen, the law is good. The law has its purpose. It takes care of so many of these things that are listed, and it's important. It has its place. But don't misunderstand it. Don't allow the law to take precedent over grace. The law drives me to grace, points me to a Savior. Friends, I hope you know that. I hope you're not trying to approach God today on the basis of your good works, but rather you're seeking to approach the Lord on the basis of the good and finished work of Jesus Christ. That's the only way to approach the Lord. That's the only way the door is opened up. Well, I hope you have a beautiful weekend. Look forward to seeing you next week here on A Daily Walk. God bless you.